Hi, I'm Nina Melendez, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, a show about the world of work and our place in it. So much of last year was about self-preservation. So let's start this year talking about just that. How can we manage burnout, and what is an effective professional way of setting boundaries to avoid burnout? Well, joining me now is Hamilton Chan. He is the head of executive education and visiting professor of business and technology at Loyola Law School. He has a LinkedIn Learning course titled How to Be Both Assertive and Likable, and he should know he is both. He received his JD from Harvard Law and his undergrad in psychology from Harvard University. Hamilton, so great to have you on the show again. Welcome.
Nina, it's great to see you as well. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hamilton, I'm excited to talk about this because as we start the year, we want to put our best foot forward, and that includes setting boundaries so that we can succeed at work in the way that we want to. My question for you is, what are some signs that indicate that perhaps one has trouble setting boundaries? What can we see in the work that indicates that?
I think especially in this day and age where people are working a lot more from home and working from anywhere, it becomes really important to set those boundaries. And one of the signs that you aren't setting them properly is if you are starting to feel really resentful towards your job. If you feel like you're starting to develop some passive aggression where you know that you're complaining a lot to your friends, to your family, thinking internally that work isn't working for you, when you feel burned out or showing signs of burnout, I think that's an indication that you probably aren't setting your boundaries properly. Another indicator would be if you look to your left, to your right, to your colleagues, and you see that they're not putting in the same amount of hours, for example, that you are, then that is a suggestion that it isn't a level playing field, and you might need to look inward to figure out why that is.
I loved that point of the resentment and also the burnout. The CDC a couple years ago called it an occupational phenomenon, added it to the classification of diseases. So it's a real thing and it's prevalent.
Yeah.
How is burnout related to the fact that one maybe isn't putting up enough boundaries?
It's extremely related. I do feel like life has a way of pushing on you. So if you don't push back a certain amount, you're going to find yourself just getting overwhelmed by the amount of demands that are out there. Just think about people's email inboxes. Some people receive 100, 1,000 emails a day. Think about people's Slack messages. If you don't stop the treadmill of inputs that are coming into your world, it simply won't stop. So it's really incumbent upon people to set some boundaries for themselves. It's very doable. And I think it's something that is a skill that can be learned. It's a critical workplace skill. But I think ultimately workplace overload and burnout is really critical because it impinges on people's health, on their physical health, on their mental health, on the health of their relationships at home. And their longevity and sustainability. So really, I think part of the message is that oftentimes what you're trying to communicate to say, your boss, if you feel like your boundaries are being overstepped, is help me help you. Like if I get burned out, then I become less capable at helping you get things done. So ultimately, it's in your own best interest to allow me to set my own boundaries.
So you mentioned skill, and we're going to learn that skill now. Hopefully you're going to teach it to us.
Yeah.
I want to say hi to some members who are joining us across the country, across the world. Wow, we've got Jacqueline from Argentina, Stella from France, Carrie from Oakland, California, and Spencer in Washington, D.C. And actually, we would love to hear from our audience. The question is, what are your work non-negotiables? So does that mean don't email me at midnight and expect a response? Is it don't ask me to wake up before 5 a.m.? Whatever they are, let us know. We'd love to hear and share with the community. Okay, so Hamilton, if someone has trouble setting boundaries, right? What are maybe some other things at work that perhaps they have trouble doing too? What are is it perhaps maybe they're too much of a people pleaser, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think setting boundaries has some overlap on ability to deliver on promises. It's not only making sure that you're not over-promising, but also that you are delivering on the promises that you do make. So I do think that the two are related, and I think that ultimately what you want is a really high ratio between what you say you're going to do and what you actually do. If you feel like you're suffering on that ratio because simply too much is coming at your way, the first thing to look at is to make sure that you have a certain amount of leverage at the job. It's easy to, ask for load management if you're LeBron James, because everyone knows they'll take whatever they can from you. But if you're not a superstar, you really want to first look a little bit at your own performance and see if, in fact, you do have leverage to ask for the things that you're asking for.
How do you get that leverage?
I mean, I think ultimately it's delivering on what you do. So if you're trying to tell people, I can't have 10 things assigned to me and only deliver 2, you have to make sure that you deliver on the 2 things then that you say are within your wheelhouse, that you say are what you're going to be able to do. So it goes back to the basics of rolling up the sleeves and saying, am I communicating well with others? Am I getting proper context? And am I working as efficiently as I ought to be? Am I getting the resources that I need? Am I raising my hand and asking for help to clear barriers that are keeping me from getting my work done efficiently? So if you can do all of those things, then I think you gain leverage in the eyes of the company. I think this is one of the key points to make, is that most people think that when you set your boundaries, you're essentially lowering your stock. You're saying, oh, I'll only go this far for the company. But it's really the reverse. When you set your boundaries, your stock actually rises because people realize that you are now valuing your own time. You're valuing yourself. And in so doing, they will value you.
I love that. In setting boundaries, you're not lowering your stock. On the contrary, you're setting up
Raising
your
it.
stock, and you're also setting yourself up for success. So you can deliver more on those promises that you make.
Yes. I learned that skill, I guess, earlier. I saw the pitfalls of my approach. I was a people pleaser. And my very first job out of college was working for JP Morgan. I was an investment banker. It's a notoriously intense environment. I was working in Hong Kong. And I was working literally, Nina, 130 hours per week. And I knew because I had to sign out my taxi reimbursement form every night. And I typically left the office at about 5 a.m. It was when the newspapers got delivered in the morning back in the day. And I was back at work by 9:30 or 10 a.m. and I worked 7 days a week. It was insane. It was crazy. And I noticed that somebody else in my department at JP Morgan was getting the same positive reviews that I was, only they were leaving at 9 p.m. every night. It's like, what am I doing wrong than leaving a full 8-hour shift later than this person? And yet we still have the same evaluation. And so that really opened my eyes to the fact that it's not just about hours, it's really about effectiveness.
It almost feels like the joke's on you at that point.
Exactly.
I've always, the majority of my career has been in news and doing international news, and I'd have to work for London programming on July 4th because, of course, for them it's not Independence Day, and I would volunteer to work on July 4th, on Thanksgiving, on Christmas, because I thought that it upped my stock as an employee, and I think it had like zero impact at the end of the day.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all. Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you say yes to everything, then you start to get taken for granted. So imagine the person who's just down for anything all of the time. When they say they're up for something, it's not that big a deal. So it's really important to save your yeses for things that really do matter in order to raise the worth of an approval from you.
So I want to go through a couple of scenarios with you, Hamilton, because all of this is great in theory, but in practice, how do you do it? Especially if you're a people pleaser, especially if you have trouble saying no or setting boundaries up. Let's start with the first one. It's the early bird ask. So this one, your boss asked you to come into work early. This is the 3rd time this week, and you are worried this is becoming a habit. You feel bad about complaining, but you also know that everyone is working hard and making sacrifices. Hamilton, what advice would you give to this person?
I think the first thing is to really get an understanding, and the understanding goes both ways. I think one is to understand from your boss, why is this going on? Is this a temporary thing or is this a long-term thing? I think the other thing is to provide understanding and to explain why this might be problematic for you. Is it that you have to drop off your kid to school in the morning, or that you're a late riser, or that you're more effective working in the afternoon or the evening? So I think before jumping to any conclusions, it's really important to get overall understanding and to provide even personal context. And then I think the next thing is to show empathy. I think this part gets lost because, yes, of course, a big part of being able to set boundaries is being comfortable, getting uncomfortable, being okay to be what some people consider to be assertive or even confrontational. But I think when you do it from the standpoint of empathy, you get yourself a lot further down that path while hopefully not losing also that little bit of edge that you need to say what it is that you really think. So I'd probably start off by saying, hey, boss, these early morning things, so are these going to be regular? Because they're hard for me. I actually have to drop off my kids in the morning to school. I don't mind doing it in a pinch, but I do see it's like the third time this week, and I'm not sure I can continue it. But I also want to understand from you, like, what is your thinking? What do you see going forward?
That's great. That's also sets expectations up.
Yes.
Clarifying the expectations and being able to know how to proceed with them there.
Yeah. And hopefully the tone that you get is, wow, this person is actually taking initiative, is actually addressing an issue head on, is showing a certain amount of confidence. I think a lot of times when people don't push back is because they fundamentally are lacking confidence. And it could be not just personal confidence, but it could be confidence in the situation. Maybe you're a new hire and you don't want to say anything. But I think just like in other parts of life, where you show confidence, it is rewarded. So I think it is important to think of it not as being a jerk or being assertive or intimidating or not a team player, but it's really about showing confidence and showing that you value your own time.
So speaking of confidence, we actually have a great question from our member, Hyacinth. I hope I pronounced that right. Hyacinth asks, aren't there boundaries that can get you fired? And I can certainly relate to not wanting to set boundaries out of fear of repercussions. What's your response to Hyacinth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why the initial analysis has to be on your performance. If you're a firefighter and you're saying my boundary is I won't respond to fires that wake me up in the morning, that's obviously you being derelict on the job. That is not living up to the expectations of the job. So I think it's important to get real and to really look at just how you're setting your boundaries. Now, if your boundaries are reasonable and the company is demanding unreasonable boundaries, then I think it's important as an individual employee to begin to provide yourself some leverage. Can you get different rules from the rules that are being asserted at the workforce? Can you find another job alternative? Can you make yourself so indispensable that the work needs to bend to you rather than you bending to the work?
Let's bring up the next scenario we've got for you, Hamilton. This is the weekend texter, and this has to do with a colleague, not a boss. So your colleague has been texting you on the weekend. Sometimes it's social, sometimes it's to ask about a project. In spite of it always being friendly, you're becoming uncomfortable with it. How do you approach, your colleagues? Clearly well-intentioned, friendly, but talking about work stuff on weekends, and maybe this is the last thing you want to be doing on a Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I think
you laugh like it's happened. You laugh like it's happened to you, Hamilton.
I mean, everybody
you laugh like it's happened to you last weekend.
That's right. There's no more walls in the virtual world that we live in. Everyone's texting, everyone's emailing and calling and that kind of thing. So I think the first question is, what do you want out of the scenario? That's the first thing. Are you uncomfortable because you don't want a social relationship with this person, or are you uncomfortable because the social is a vehicle for actually nudging you about work? I think if it's the latter, what I would want to do is probably start first really nice. Again, not jumping to conclusions. Maybe this isn't their intention. Maybe they're just lonely. And actually the work is an excuse for them to get into the social rather than the social being an excuse for them to get into the work. But I'd want to, let's say that they were actually trying to drive at getting you involved in some work, at work questions, let it leak through. And probably this might be considered passive aggressive, of course, but I might be slow in responding to those kinds of texts. I might push them off till the end of the weekend to kind of lead the way and lead with the behavior that this is the cadence that we're going to respond on. I think cadence is actually something that is suggested all the time in, for example, email communications. Are you responding within 24 hours, within 1 hour? That begins to set the expectation. So I'd want to set the expectation differently there. If it became too problematic, then of course, yes, you got to address it head on. And you might try humor if it's a friend, like, hey, do you work all weekend long? Because, hey, man, I don't do that. or you can rib them some other way. But I think ultimately you might have to have a clear conversation to say, hey, sorry, I'm slow on in responding on text on the weekend. I tend not to pick up my phone on the weekends.
Great. So different ways to do it, to sort of be light and kind of a little passive about it, and then just to be straight and say, this is not what I do on the weekend. Yeah.
Absolutely. I do believe that there need to be boundaries that are set in these colleague to colleague relationships as well. And hopefully people will understand that not only are you respecting your own boundaries, but you're also going to respect theirs in return.
Okay, we've got one final scenario I want to bring up for you.
Sure.
And this is the new employee. So you just started a new job. It's week 4, and the duties you're responsible for fall outside the scope of the job description. You are new and don't want to complain, but you also feel like you've been duped. So I've had people talk to me about this, where they say, I just started this job, but oh my God, I'm doing things that I didn't interview for. Maybe it's things that are maybe a little bit lower on the responsibility list or beneath them, one could say. But yeah, how do you do this, especially when you're new? And maybe also, Hamilton, talk to us about the importance of setting boundaries when you first start a job to sort of set the right kind of precedence.
Yes. And speaking of boundaries, I apologize for the call that came in. That was DirecTV. They're not respecting my boundaries.
We didn't hear it. It was all good.
Okay, good. So I think with the new job scenario, of course, it's very tricky. And in so much of what we're talking about, it's way more in the art and in the touch and in the finesse than it is in strictly the science of how to do it. If you speak the right way, you can get a lot further than if you speak the wrong way, even with the right content. So I think really important is to establish first some empathy. These days in the workforce, I know that a lot of companies are embracing radical candor, but I kind of like embracing instead of radical empathy. And then the first thing is, thank you so much for entrusting me with all of these responsibilities. I feel really gratified by this. At the same time, it is more than I signed up for originally, and I'd love to be able to handle all of this work. At the same time, there's only one of me to go around. Would you be open to a potential pay raise so that I can also justify on my own ledger that it makes sense for me to get all of this work done? Or are there other resources? Could I maybe help train somebody else that they can help out? So it's from the lens of me helping you. And I think that's one other point that I'd love to make today, which is, most bosses would prefer a star performer to let them know that they're in danger of being burned out rather than just straight up and quit. So you're really doing your boss a favor when you're communicating with them and telling them that you are feeling burnout and that it's gone too far.
That's excellent. Yeah. I want to come to the perspective from the boss next, but I do want to say hi to some of our members again. We've got Lindsay from Connecticut, Anthony from New Jersey, Kenya from Uganda. Welcome everyone to the show. And our question we were asking, you can feel free to put in the stream and discuss amongst yourselves, what are some of your work non-negotiables? So so maybe it's not getting texts on the weekend, or maybe it's, I don't know, let us know. I've run out of ideas. Speaking of the managers, Hamilton, what happens if you are a manager and you have a direct report who is really good at setting boundaries, almost too good, to the point where they're perhaps not meeting expectations. But as a manager, you want to lead with empathy, like you said, you want to be understanding and you want to respect their boundaries. What is a way that a manager can navigate that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to remind yourself is you get what you tolerate. So if you're getting poor performance and you're essentially being bullied by your own employee, I think it's important to make sure that you're not just covering up for their shortfalls, that you are actually getting the help that you need at your company. But again, let's start first with empathy, and understanding. What is the context? What is going on? Is something going on in their personal life? Are there other barriers that we're not aware of? Are we not explaining tasks well? Are we not communicating properly? I think that's really important to ask upfront and really get their side of the story. But I think really communicate early is important because it is easy to get passive aggressive quickly. And so making it clear upfront that the performance isn't up to snuff, I think is important. The other thing is to try to make the analysis of the assessment of their performance as objective as possible. So try to like literally write out what are the job responsibilities, what are the milestones, the OKRs, the objectives and key results that you're seeking, so that and a third party observer could look at whether expectations were being met or not.
And what about actually the reverse of that? So say you have a boss who takes sets a lot of boundaries for him or herself, maybe to the point where it's impacting how you're able to perform. How do you deal with that if it's your boss?
I think, again, speaking early and often is good, and communicating that you need more help in order to get the thing done that you want. There, a lot of bosses, as they rise in seniority, they may have their own expectations for, oh, now I get to be on the golf course. Now I'm getting later in life. I don't have the same energy I once did. I went through the grind, so you now have to as well. And I think it's important to communicate again what your expectations are. And one of the best things you can do, just like in any negotiation, is get leverage for yourself. That affects the outcome. So if you're in such high demand that there are other bosses at your given company whom you could work for, if there are other employers out there that would gladly receive your talents, I think that's when you can start making a few demands and saying, look, in order to be able to be as effective for you as possible, I'm going to need a little bit more from you.
Hamilton, that's so great. We have to end the show. I don't want to, but our time is up. I do want to end on one comment from our guest, from one of our members. His name is Charles. He says, setting the boundaries and having a code of conduct is a first step in being productive and delivering your full potential and striving to be your best version. I 1000% agree. Hamilton, thank you for joining. And thanks. This was the first show of the year. So it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming on LinkedIn News Live.
My pleasure, Nina. It's great seeing you. Have a happy new year and look forward to seeing you again.
See you again soon. That was Hamilton Chan. He is head of executive education at Loyola Law School. And he's also the author of this wonderful LinkedIn learning course called How to Be Likeable and Assertive. So you want to check that out. And thank you for everyone who participated in the conversation here on the platform. You can continue it here. You can also check out some of our other news stories to the right of your feed, or if you're on mobile, you can just click into the search box. On Wednesday, there will be office hours. Hello Monday office hours. We're going to be discussing reinvention in the midst of fear and how you can set goals when you are apprehensive, how to do that effectively and how to do that well. Thank you so much for watching LinkedIn News Live. I'm Nina Melendez. Have a great afternoon.